Good afternoon and welcome to today's Adweek webinar. We'll be looking at what if consumers don't want personalized experiences. And ultimately this will be providing you with a framework for better targeting. And today's webinar is being sponsored by YouGov. I'm Stuart File, Custom Publishing Director of Adweek, and I will be your host for today's webinar. So before we begin, let me just give you a sense of what to expect today and make sure that all of our attendees today are familiar with our webinar platform. Our presentation should go somewhere in the 30 to 35 minute range. Afterwards, we're going to have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please just use the question tool on the left side of your screen, and we're going to get to as many audience questions as we can once the presentation is over. We are supporting social sharing on today's webinar. You'll see on the bottom of our opening slide the hashtag we're using, hashtag personalized framework. So use that to let us know you're joining us today. If you're out there on Twitter, post something, follow along. We will be live tweeting out some of the slides from the Adweek Webinars Twitter feed at AW Webinars. And you can follow along with that hashtag using the Twitter widget, which is one of the tabs that you see up at the top of your screen. It's not too late to invite your colleagues to join us today, and we would love it if they do. So probably about 15 minutes ago, you received a final reminder email for today's event. In there, you'll find a link over to our registration page. So share that link with your colleagues, have them join us now, and if they can't make it live, our webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand. We'll be alerting all registrants to that later this afternoon, so they can always come and check the recording, check the on-demand version at any time. A couple other things I just want to cover here. If you want a copy of today's slide deck, you will find that in the Event Resources tab at the top of your screen. So feel free to download that PDF of those slides. Also, if you return and you catch the on-demand version of this webinar, in that same area you'll be able to find an MP3 recording of the webinar. So if you prefer just to want to hear the audio, treat it as a podcast, you can return later on today and you'll find that MP3 available as well. Finally, if you enjoyed today's webinar, please check out the Adweek webinar calendar, www.adweek.com/webinars, that's with an S. And you'll see what we've got coming up. We actually have a full calendar for the rest of May as well as the entire month of June. Probably you'll have about 2 a week, a lot of different topics ranging from that are of interest to marketers, things on customer experience, connected TV. We've got certainly some things on influencer marketing coming up. So check out what we've got coming up. You also will have access to our complete library of on-demand webinars there as well. So let me take a moment here and talk about today's webinar and introduce you to today's speaker. We're very happy to be joined by Mark Jefford. Mark is Director of Data Applications over at YouGov. And over there, Mark, as you can see and you'll see described here on this slide, sort of what his responsibilities are, but he's really part of the group that provides clients with new and innovative data products and solutions utilizing the wealth of data that YouGov collects. And he's going to be sharing some really interesting findings today about personalization and also really helping everybody out with an understanding of some of the best practices for really making personalization and this kind of targeting work for you, especially when people don't always want that personalized message. So Mark, let's go on over to you for today's presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, as Stuart said, I'm going to be taking you through today a presentation around what if consumers don't want personalized experiences, and I'm going to introduce to you a framework for better targeting to consumers. And this is really a typical sort of use case for using YouGov's data for any of our clients. So to kick off, I always think it's good to start a presentation with a quote from Charles Darwin. This quote, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change. And never really has that been more true for brands than in 2018. We're all probably acutely aware of the fact that there are a number of brands that we all consume on a day-to-day basis that didn't exist 10 years ago, and there are also perhaps even more brands who were household names 20 to 30 years ago who were not adaptable to change and that no longer, unfortunately, exist. And of course, adaptation or transformation, which is a real kind of buzzword in our industry, is nothing new. We've always, as marketers or even as kind of data, audience, research types, we've always had to adapt to a sort of changing consumer need. So if you go back 50 or 60 years ago, where media planning was largely sort of built off of a mixture of gut instinct, but also kind of focus groups with small numbers of people, or perhaps knocking door to door, asking people what they thought of a product. That then became slightly more nuanced as we got into the world of quantitative data, where we started to gather large surveys, getting people to respond to what they like about their brand, what they don't like, etc., etc. It then became even more nuanced as we got into the world of transactional data. So we start to understand that people have bought our product, so how do we then retarget them when we think that they might be prepared to purchase again? And then that's got even more detailed as we've gone along, and whilst there's been more data to gather, where we can start to understand how people are shopping. Why are they going to particular stores? How long are they spending there? What else are they looking at? And of course, in the modern age, in 2018, we also have mobile data as well, and I'll come on to this a little bit later on, but that means that we have the likes of location data, so we can start to understand where people have gone, for how long they're spending their time there, where they've been before, as well as, of course, all of the online data that we can gather about what people are searching for, which websites they're visiting, what apps are they using. But of course, with the pace of technology and data, the pace of change, that's kind of ever increasing, which means that there is more data available than ever before. And there's this sort of regularly quoted stat that in the last year, more data was created than in the previous 5,000 years. And of course, what that brings with it is a sort of fear factor from some people who will be concerned that, how do we cut through all of this data and make sense of it? But of course, it also brings with it lots and lots of opportunities as well. And so I think as marketers or as brands, it's important to understand that there is all of this data, but you need to kind of segment it and understand who are the key audiences that you want to be targeting, and what are the key insights that you want to extract from that data about those audiences. So before we get into a kind of a best practice for that, if you like, I wanted to set the scene slightly, and I think the scene can quite easily be set by understanding 4 key innovation trends that we believe are impacting marketing in 2018. So the first is that there are many new data collection methods. A deeper understanding of consumer journeys. As I've already alluded to, there are lots of new ways that we can start to capture the online journey in particular, but also the offline journey as well. So, for example, we can start to understand why people are beginning a search for a product, how long they might be searching for that product for, the number of websites they visit, the number of brands that they might sort of have touch points with before they actually get onto a purchase. And all of the array of data that is available now means that you can really start to build up quite a rich picture of people's consumer journeys. But also, we're seeing as well that improved artificial intelligence is helping to sort of drive personalization of customer experience as well. Of course, for years, Amazon has been great at this. You go onto the Amazon website, it knows what you've bought previously, it's going to serve you products that it thinks that you would like to purchase to accompany that. But I think what we'll start to see more of is actually that when brands understand that people who visited their website have been looking around on previous days, they'll start to reorganize that website accordingly so that the content that really is going to resonate with an individual consumer will be brought to the forefront. And of course, that may sort of develop into sort of more detailed A/B testing, where we can start testing against one particular group of people, one piece of content, and against another group of people, a different piece of content. But you can almost do that in a dynamic fashion. And dynamism and dynamic data is something that we'll sort of keep coming back to as a recurring theme in this conversation. And marketers will also find ways to use customer data to enhance and personalize great content. The marketers are always looking for any way possible to obviously get more money, more bang for your buck. And of course, by enhancing and personalizing great content, they can hopefully reduce wastage. So a sort of more detailed, targeted audience, and we'll come on to that in a moment, but also kind of building a trust with consumers by actually producing something for them that's really tangible and that is very individual to them, and that they're actually going to engage with at much higher levels. If we get all of that right, then there's going to be higher levels of ROI. And what we also see is that technology is enhancing the personal customer experience as well. So the likes of virtual reality, augmented reality are opening up more opportunities for consumers and for brands to be able to kind of tailor that customer experience prior to somebody actually handing over their hard-earned cash and paying for an experience. So let's take, for example, the travel sector. This is probably going to be really affected by VR and AR, where somebody can plan a holiday, but before they've even actually gone and booked it with their credit card, they can see what the airway experience is like, how much space are they going to have in their seats, what's the entertainment systems like. They can look at that through a VR experience. Then they can go to a hotel, they can see how spacious their room is, they can see what facilities there are, and also, of course, with all of the maps data that's available as well through the likes of Google, it's then possible to have a look around the local area and see, are there enough restaurants and bars for me to keep me interested for a couple of weeks. So all of this kind of means that winning in the future requires marketers to organize data around people, not around campaigns or channels, give the consumer what they want before they want it, and be flexible and agile to respond to consumer behaviors. Now, what this all means, essentially, is that in this kind of age of Amazon, where consumers know what they want, they know when they want it, and they know how they want it, and this applies pretty much to every single industry and category, it's become incumbent upon brands and marketers to really give consumers what they want, even before they know that they want it. And one of the ways that you can really get at that is to have a very deep understanding of the consumer by using data. And of course, the flexibility and agility is about understanding that consumers are not always going to be the same. So whereas 50 or 60 years ago, it would have been okay, maybe even 20 or 30 years ago, to run a segmentation and base your business decisions off the back of the results of that segmentation for 2 or 3 years. In the modern world, that's really not going to fly, because you need to have a deep understanding of those people on a day-by-day basis and see how the world changes around them. And at YouGov, that's very much the position that we take. And probably the most important point that I make in this whole presentation is really that the consumer is the most important asset and source of innovation and growth for brands. So you have customers at your fingertips. They're the ones who are consuming your brand, consuming your product, and they know the reasons why they are doing that. So if you can really tap into them and understand them, then they're going to give you all of the insights you require to help you to innovate your brand, take it forward and grow it, and ensure that you are agile enough to stand out in the modern era. At YouGov, we very much kind of stand by that. So we are, for the benefit of those of you who are perhaps not aware of YouGov, we are a global tech-driven data and analytics group. We've been disrupting the traditional market research industry ever since we launched, and we've constantly been pioneering new forms of online research. We very much think of consumers, we think of our panelists as consumers, and we put those at the center of our business. We know how important they are, and we believe that they're the most important asset that we have. And so when it comes to innovation, when we are creating a new data product, or when we are thinking about how we can develop something new for clients, we always try to think of, okay, what's the panelist experience going to be like? Because there's no point us creating something new, collecting data in a new way, if it's going to ultimately annoy our panelists and mean that that's going to damage our business. So really that follows the same sort of path to innovation that I've been talking about before. Put consumers at the center of your business, and it will really help you to grow your business long term. And what we hope to be able to do with our data as well is to help marketing to create a one-to-one conversation and, I suppose, create a meaningful experience with consumers as well. So we feel that you can move from using the types of data that we collect from media planning, where you are buying static things, to a world in which you can actually personalize experiences and design better brand experiences for consumers. So, of course, so far I've talked quite a bit about personalization. And personalization is a theme, it's a sort of trend that's been, it's not new to 2018, it's probably been a sort of buzzword in media for 4 or 5 years. And every year I think people talk about it, almost like they talked about the year of mobile, as this is the year of personalization. But what we wanted to understand was that if personalization is such an important trend, what do consumers actually think about it? And is there actually a genuine consumer appetite for personalized experiences? So the first thing that we found, and this is using British data, I should say, so 36% of GB adults say that they're more likely to engage with adverts that are tailored to them. Now, you could probably spin that either way. You could say that's a positive thing. There's more than a third of GB adults say that if you personalize adverts for them, tailor adverts for them, they're going to engage with them. But more than half of GB adults also say that personalized ads creep them out. So there is certainly an idea here that if you get it wrong, and if you target the wrong people with personalized advertising, tailored advertising, you are pretty likely to creep them out and think that your brand is impinging on their sort of personal space, and their, particularly in the sort of the modern era where data privacy is so important, they're going to get slightly concerned about it. Which gives us all the more reason why we should create a framework for understanding ad personalization. And this is just an example of the type of thing that we can create out of our data. But really, we're creating these types of frameworks for all manner of different needs. So this particular one, we've got 2 axes. We have on the y-axis, I'm more likely to engage with adverts that are tailored to me. And on the x-axis, we have advertising helps me to choose what to buy. 2 very simple attitudinal statements that we're able to split by agreement level, from agree to disagree, with neutral in the middle. And what we find is that we have, in the top left-hand corner, we have a group that we've called Tailor Swiftly. Excuse the pun. But what we aim to do with this group is to say, okay, so if you target these people with tailored advertising, they are probably going to like it. But more generally, they actually say they don't like they don't feel that advertising is actually particularly helpful to them. So perhaps there's an opportunity with this group to get at them quickly with tailored advertising and try and shift them across the framework into a group that has a greater appetite for advertising. In the bottom left-hand group, you have shout and let it all out. This is a fairly large group, but these are the people who say advertising, tailored advertising, they're really put off by it. And also, they don't particularly like advertising either. So you're probably, if you're an advertiser, if you're a marketer, you're probably going to be wasting your ad dollars by targeting these people with a personalized ad experience. You're probably, in fact, going to put them off your brand even more than they might be already. But in the top right-hand corner, we have this group called the personalized pioneers. And these people are very likely to say that they think that they would engage with adverts that are tailored to them, but also they think that advertising is helpful to them as well. It helps them to choose products. So they're really, really open to advertising. They're open to tailored and personalized advertising. So this should be the group that, in the first instance, if you're going to be embarking upon a new sort of ad personalization strategy, these are the people you should be looking at. So what we can do using our data that is collected from a wide range of different sources, but primarily from online surveys that we send out, as well as being collected from passively tracked and metered website and app usage data, well, we're able to paint a very rich picture of this audience beyond just standard demographics. Of course, we can get those. We could tell you that these are most likely to be a female group, probably with a reasonably high social grade, high income, etc. But actually, what we can start to say is that these people expect adverts to be entertaining. They enjoy watching ads with their favorite celebrities. They're often the first of their friends to try new technology. They're emotional people. They're extroverts. They're risk takers. And we also know the different types of social media that they follow. So we can see that, for example, Katy Perry and The Rock are most likely, they're the most likely people that they're going to follow on Twitter. We can see the types of apps that they use for live streaming, because actually these people are on social media a lot and they like to sort of tell everyone about their lives. And we know about their hobbies and interests. They're into beauty and fashion and celebrities. So what you can start to do with that data is really, really get a feel of, if you're going to be creating something that's personalized to these people, you can sort of tailor your message accordingly so that it's really going to tap into what these people like. And of course, we can also see that actually there's a value to that as well. So these people are twice as likely to use new technology products as soon as they enter the market. So if you are innovating, for example, a tech product, this is a group you really want to target, and you want to target them with personalized advertising. And not only that, but 2/3 of people agree that people tend to ask them for advice before buying things. So what that suggests is they're influential. If you get the messaging right with these people, not only are they going to actually go and buy your brand, but they're going to tell other people about it as well. So they'll propagate your message even further. So, as a marketer, how can you kind of innovate your experiences to reach these personalized pioneers? Well, the first thing that you can do is that, again, because of the type of data that exists, you can understand the nuances across regions to localize messaging and activation. So, for example, and again, this is using GB data, but the Tailor Swiftly group, if you decided that you wanted to act fast and you wanted to send some personalized advertising out to this group to see whether you could actually change their perception about how advertising helps them to choose what to buy, well, there's no point doing that, or there's little point doing that, if you're in London or the southeast of England, because actually you're going to find most of these people in the north of England or towards Scotland. Whereas if you're going after the personalised pioneers, these people that we think are the most disposed to or that have the highest disposition towards personalised advertising, then, yeah, you should probably tailor your advertising to ensure that it's localised around London and the southeast, because that's where you'll find the bulk of those people. But what you can also do as well is you can map and understand their online journeys and behaviours. So as I talked about before, the wealth of data that we have available these days that allows us to be able to say, what are people looking at online before they make a purchase, will really help you to understand the touch points and see where you can actually make an impact. So if somebody's buying Nike trainers, have they gone online a year before to search for trainers? Is that a really long process? Which other products have they considered previously, and have they considered those on mobile? Have they considered them on tablet? What are the various different elements of that category they've been searching for? So all of these things come into play that help you to paint a very, very rich picture of who these people are. And then also, and this is something that we are currently trialing with our own data. When I talked earlier about that we are constantly innovating, we're always looking for new ways that we can enhance our data. So for a long time, we have collected, for example, survey data asking people which coffee shops they visit. So we will be able to tell you that X% of GB adults or X% of the personalised pioneers shop at Starbucks or buy their coffee from Starbucks every morning. Well, what we'll be able to do going forward in the near future is that we'll actually be able to identify people who have actually been to a Starbucks. And we'll then be able to tell you, sample dependent, of course, how many people have been to a Starbucks in London, or how many people have been to a Starbucks in New York, for example. And that will help us to be able to build up a very rich picture of the sort of physical journeys that these groups make. So if we're talking about the personalised pioneers, we'll be able to have a look and see, when do they leave home in the morning? How long is their morning commute? Where do they buy their morning coffee? And in the afternoon, do they pop out and buy a chocolate bar? All these various different things will help you to kind of build a very rich picture of who those consumers are, but they'll also open up media opportunities for you as well. Because, for example, if you're looking at out-of-home advertising, or if you're looking at print advertising, understanding those commutes when they're out of home are going to really help you to be able to enhance that targeting. And the crucial thing really is that if you can find and target those who are disposed to innovation and personalization, you're going to have the best chance of ensuring the success of your campaign or product. At YouGov, we have a number of different integrations with various different DMPs and data houses, and these allow us to be able to say to our clients that if you find an audience who you think are really, really valuable to you, you can take that audience, and due to the integrations that we have, you can extract it from our system, we'll pass it to our partners, and they will then scale those audiences using lookalike modeling and make those audiences available for buying in the programmatic space. Crucially, we will remove our seed audience from that lookalike audience because we won't target to our own panelists. But what that then provides you with is a really rich, data-fueled, modeled audience that is very nuanced and is based upon all these insights that you've gathered in the previous stages. So, in conclusion, the brands and the marketers who are going to be most successful in the future are going to be the ones who embrace innovation, who don't stand still, are constantly looking for new ways that they can improve their business and improve their targeting. They have a deep understanding of the consumer, and that understanding is not just at one single point in time, but is dynamic over time as well. So you can do your research and you can run your segmentations, and you can continue to make actionable insights on those people or derive actionable insights on those people and segments. But what you really want to do is actually have a dynamic data set that will tell you, okay, so my segmentation 6 months ago thought this, but the world has changed around them and perhaps now they think this way. Also, the success relies upon understanding and measuring efforts. There's no point doing all of this work. There's no point creating campaigns or having really super targeted, personalized campaigns if you don't set some parameters and KPIs to understand actually has that really worked. So it's very, very important to measure those efforts. And then finally, it's about building trust, and it's building trust with consumers. Obviously, again, we live in this world of kind of, of data privacy, and so many questions abound of, do consumers trust the way that brands are using their data? But it's kind of incumbent upon brands and marketers to make sure that what you're delivering to consumers is actually a very, very good experience that people like. Because if you do that, if you provide people with the types of experiences that they think is going to enhance their online experience, for example, and is going to make them want to revisit a website, then that's going to improve the opportunity for you to actually make a sale, but ultimately it's going to build trust of that consumer with your brand as well. And building that trust over time, along with all of these other conclusions, is ultimately going to give you the best chance of success. So at that point, I will hand back to Stuart, who I believe is going to take some questions. Thank you very much.
Great. No, thank you very much, Mark. And again, thanks for really sort of going through that research and giving really our audience a keener understanding of some of the really of the practices people want to put in place for personalization. Before we get to our Q&A portion, I just want to provide a few quick reminders. First off, if you do have a question for Mark, please, we've got a number of them queued up here, but just use the question tool on the left side of your screen. We're going to get to as many as we can over the next 10 minutes or so. So even if we don't have a chance to get to your question, I will make sure it gets forwarded over to Mark, and he might have the opportunity to reach back to you offline. I also want to remind people, if you want a copy of today's slide deck, you will find that in the Event Resources tab at the top of your screen. So go on up there and feel free to download that PDF, share that with your colleagues, and certainly if you do share it with your colleagues, feel free to invite them to catch the on-demand version of today's webinar. That recording will be live in about an hour and a half from now, so check your email later this afternoon. We'll send you a link over to the on-demand version, and you'll be able to come back and listen again and certainly share it with your colleagues. So let's jump over to some of the questions that we've got lined up here, Mark, and let's talk first a little bit about innovation. I mean, you mentioned YouGov itself is a pretty innovative organization. So, what would be your advice with regards to taking that sort of best approach to being an innovative organization in your marketing and in your audience targeting? Okay, yeah, sure.
So I suppose the first thing that I would say as a general point around innovation, which I just think is good practice, is just don't be afraid to try new things. But I think also, importantly, it's about not being afraid to fail. And if you fail, try and fail as quickly as possible. But I think it's that fear that can get in the way of innovation. I think if you put in place a structure that ensures that you can try something and you can fail pretty quickly and you can succeed really frequently, that's going to ultimately help you out. You should also really ensure that your innovations are guided by consumers. So by that I mean that there's little point in creating something new, whether it be a piece of marketing or a new product, only for consumers to kind of turn around and say, we never really asked for this and it's not what we need. I would have liked that if it looked a bit like this, and then you have to go back to the drawing board and kind of redesign it. So again, it comes back to this idea that the consumer is the most important asset for innovation. So really tap into your customer base to get a kind of deep understanding of what they desire and what's going to help them to keep consuming your brand going forward.
When we're talking about personalized experiences, sometimes it's always good to sort of paint an example. And, we've gotten a few questions from people, pretty similar ones, just about sort of asking for those sort of shining examples or, the gold standard. And look, there are plenty of places you can go, and certainly I'll tell people in the audience, you can always check out Adweek because we certainly have had some case studies on personalized marketing. But Mark, can you maybe share an example or two related to personalization and how some of that has been done effectively?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess the best example, the most famous example of personalization, just purely because it's from one of the world's most famous brands, if not the most famous, is probably Coca-Cola, with their sort of branded bottles or personalized bottles. But I suppose the reason I would bring that up is I know that it's recently just made a resurgence again in recent months in the US, which kind of suggests that there's a bit of longevity to it. But we've also seen from some of our data, from our brand index, daily brand tracking data, that the most recent revamp of that campaign has led to significant increases in buzz, and to a lesser extent impression and ad awareness, but in particular amongst Twitter users. So it feels as though that sort of innovation is translating into social media, perhaps because people find that's the easiest place in which to use the hashtags related to it. But I'd say that that's probably the best example of personalisation in a sort of consumer space. I guess, Stuart, you've probably got some good examples from Adweek as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly covered some of the things that are being done on in customer experience today, and so much of that is all about the anticipation of needs and the marketing that sort of works in that area, and that fine line between anticipating and then also being a little creepy. So I know that that's stuff that people ultimately look at, but Disney is a great example of some of the things that they do at their resorts, where they personalize that entire experience. I know Carnival Cruises has done some stuff, and some really interesting things out there. Let's talk. I mean, you've mentioned, Mark, you mentioned data privacy, and certainly we've gotten a number of questions there. And somebody's asking here about sort of balancing the desire to understand the customer, right, and the use of data, and then what is maybe some of this shifting landscape going on around customer privacy and data privacy. We know, you're dialing in here from the UK, so certainly GDPR is on your mind. But this idea of again, understanding needs and also respecting consumer wishes for privacy. Do you have any thoughts on sort of the best way to strike that balance?
Yeah, of course, and you're right. I mean, we're talking at a time in which we're just a few days away from GDPR in Europe, and I won't speak in too much of a detailed fashion about it. I'm certainly not a GDPR lawyer, but what I will say is that any brand that has a kind of grown-up, sensible relationship with their customers, I think you need to think of it as a sort of two-way street, if you like. So you can help us by allowing us access to your data to provide you as a consumer or as a customer with a better brand experience. And I think if you get that balance, it doesn't need to be creepy. And in fact, by understanding those people who don't like the idea of personalization, for example, through data, we're able then to say, well, we won't target you with creepy personalized ads because we know that you don't want that. So I think it's about finding that balance. And I think the most successful brands, again, going forward, are going to be the ones who latch onto that. And I think, from YouGov's perspective, I think, we've seen this as a real opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to kind of, I think we've had an opportunity almost to kind of reset our expectations of our panelists and kind of say to the panelists, by the way, look, just as a reminder, this is how we collect our data, this is how it's used, and I think the most successful brands going forward are going to be the ones who embrace that change, not the ones who are shying away from it and saying, this is a really scary world.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I was just thinking as you were going through all this, it's essentially what you have to do is you have to personalize your campaigns for those who don't want personalization by not personalizing things to them.
Exactly, yeah.
But I mean, it ultimately comes down if personalization is paying attention to what consumers ultimately want and what they're raising their hand to say that they want, and anticipating those needs. If what they want is not to be personalized, then that is up to your brand to give it to them. I just want to remind our audience just a couple quick things. First off, if you do have a question, we've got some more here queued up, but just again, feel free to ask it. And worst case, if we don't get to it, as I said, I will forward it over to Mark. But let me get to one of the questions here. And we got a few as you're raising, looking at your analysis and sharing the YouGov data. And certainly that was based on some UK analysis. And the question is ultimately the segmentation in some other markets. I would gather that it's probably not going to be vastly different, but I guess the question here is where is YouGov, and how, if people want to sort of do this kind of analysis working with you, how would they go about doing that, and leveraging your data to sort of do this segmentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are all over the world. We collect data from most countries. We have brand tracking data, which much of these sort of frameworks that I talked about are based out of kind of brand tracking data. So on a day-by-day basis, we'll track. In the UK, we track about 1,500 brands, but I think globally we track something like 4,000 brands, and we have a variety of different measures that we have, something like 18 different ad and brand metrics, and we'll ask those surveys every single day. And then alongside that, we have online surveys that we collect as well as a sort of subsector of our panels who we collect kind of metered website data and app data from as well. We have a very large presence in the US. We have a very large presence across Europe and a growing presence in APAC as well. We have so basically our data products are brand index, but also profiles. And profiles basically takes everything we know about our most active panelists and combines them into a large audience profiling tool. And we're rolling that out into as many countries as we possibly can at the moment. And I believe at the moment we're in something like 15 countries globally, and we have ambition to continue growing that going forward. So yeah, so we collect data across the world, and we try where possible to make that as similar as it can be, or as comparable as it can be from country to country. So what that means is if we create this kind of framework in the UK, we want to be able to compare that to countries in APAC. So we will try to ensure that codebook that goes into it is sufficient so that we can actually have a sort of direct comparable data set.
Great. I think I've got time for one more question here, Mark. And let's talk for a moment about mapping out the customer journey. We got a few questions related to that. And as you're doing that, I mean, this is sort of, for any brand in this day and age, I think that's one of the big challenges that they have. So in order to sort of figure out all of the steps, figure out all of the process that goes into the buying decision, what might be some of the practices related to what you were talking about in terms of personalization and data capture that you would really want to sort of use as you're trying to figure out the journey for a specific product or for a specific segment?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's a difficult thing to do, and it's difficult for a number of reasons. I guess you could kind of split this into two parts. You can either do it on a very macro level or a quant level, or you can do it on a kind of qual level. And I suppose I'll start with the quant first of all because it's a bit harder. But with this, what you're looking at, I suppose, general trends between particular audiences. And so let's say, for example, that we are looking at time of day. So like that map that I showed you of the typical commute or the time that when somebody might be going to a coffee shop, for example. So what you're really looking at there is within a particular target group or a particular segment, at what time are they most likely to be doing that? Because, of course, one person will be going at 10:59, one person will be going at 11:01, and actually you scale that up into millions of people. I mean, we have 5 million people on our panel globally. You suddenly have a data set it's pretty difficult to see the wood from the trees. Do you need to set those parameters to be able to ensure that, okay, we're going to look at a particular range here, let's say, of between 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock, what's the most likely thing that people are doing? Are they going for a coffee? Are they going swimming? Are they going to the cinema? And you start to build a picture that way. So I think that's how you sort of start at a quant level. At a sort of qualitative level, what it's possible to do through passive data collection is that you can actually drill into an individual panelist's data. Now, when we say individual panelist, this is an anonymized panelist. We don't know who this person is. We can't identify them by any personal identifiable information. But we can know that this person has visited this website on this particular day. 3 days later, they've made a YouTube search for a particular video. And then 2 days later, they've taken an action and they've gone and visited a particular website off the back of that. So it's only really possible or viable to do that at a sort of qualitative level. You take a handful of people who are typical for a particular group, so let's say our personalized pioneers. You'll take 2 or 3 of those people and we'll look back at their data and see actually what interesting stories emerge. It becomes very, very difficult to kind of quantify that, as I say, when you start to look at the entire group because you're looking at billions and billions of data points.
Got it. Mark, I want to thank you again. I think we've just sort of got enough time here, and we're summed up on Q&A. But again, thank you again for sharing your insights today. Just some final reminders here to our audience. First off, the slides are available in the Event Resources tab at the top of your screen. So lastly, go over there and download those. And as I said, if you return later on today, you can download an MP3, and if you want to hear again what Mark was saying. Our webinar, of course, has been recorded. Will be available on demand, so check your email at about 3:45 Eastern time today. You can do the time zone conversions, but you'll have a link over to the on-demand version, so you can come back again, watch the webinar again, or share it with your colleagues. Give them the opportunity to get some of this knowledge. So again, thanks to our speaker. Thanks to our audience for taking time out of your busy day. Check out what we've got coming up at Adweek Webinars, www.adweek.com/webinars, and we look forward to seeing all of you at an upcoming Adweek webinar.